everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in today, wherever you are, whenever you are watching this. We wanted to reach out to you and just spend a little bit of time talking about ways that we might be able to cope with this quarantine that we're dealing with from the COVID-19 outbreak. My name is Todd. I'm one of the pastors at First Church Springdale, and I have joining me today two members of First Church Springdale, Mr. Curt Matzenbacher and Miss Dina Welsh. I have them introduce themselves just a little bit, and then we have some things that we're going to talk about today that hopefully you will find helpful. And then if anything, you could just kind of stay tuned until the end and find some resources that might be helpful. If you didn't find this particularly helpful, we apologize ahead of time, but we hopefully will give you some resources that you can use in the days and weeks to follow. So Curt, why don't you start? Just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do in your work life.
Yeah. My name is Curt Matzenbacher. I'm a licensed professional counselor and also a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am certified in emotionally focused therapy, which is primarily was formulated as a couples model, but is used sometimes for individuals as well. I see a lot of couples as well as individuals and kind of a wide variety of issues there. And I practice at Stillwater's Family Counseling in Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Awesome. And Dina, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, so my name is Dina Welsh, and I work as a licensed associate counselor and a licensed associate marriage and family therapist for the Joshua Center. And we have several locations, but locally or close by in Fayetteville and Rogers.
Well, guys, thank you all so much for joining me. And like I said, we're just going to have a little discussion here that I know will be helpful for me. If I could just kind of confess my own selfishness at this, then I think it'll be helpful for me to hear you both speak about this as professionals, but also hopefully for those who are viewing this right now, that they'll be able to get something out of this as well. So one of the things that we wanted to start our time with and start talking about was, what are some of the biggest struggles that you all think people will be dealing with this? I know that this kind of seemed like, and I'll just speak personally for me, it kind of, at the beginning, it seemed like not too big of a change. And like, oh, this will be kind of a nice little reprieve, almost like a staycation, if you will. But the more news that we've seen, obviously, the more that's like, oh no, this could be weeks, months, and we might even be talking a year to 18 months here. And so the struggles have started. And I think we were talking right before we started recording that just, the first couple of weeks, like we were okay, we were making it, but now I'm starting to see some anxiety, not only in my own life, but also with my children and the rest of my family. So is that something y'all resonate with as well? And what do you think's at the root of a lot of that right now?
Yeah, I can speak to it. I think that, we're seeing that particularly those that already have a history of things like depression and anxiety, as well as PTSD or addictions, maybe particularly susceptible to this. But I think that something to keep in mind for all of us is that none of us are built to be isolated.
Mm-hmm.
We're created for connection, is a phrase that we circles that Dina and I both run in, is used a lot. And it's really going to have an impact on us if we're not getting that social, relational, connection. And just being thrown off of routines and we like to kind of know what's coming next. Of course, that's a way that we, try to plan for the future to comfort ourselves and not having access to that right now. Of course, it's going to be a struggle, something to adjust to for all of us. So yeah, I think that the difficulty in finding different methods of connection and comfort will impact every one of us. Yeah.
I think that's something that there are things that I know are struggles in my own heart and soul, and even in my own thought process. But there's in a way, with the kind of hustle and bustle of what normal was before all this, they kind of laid dormant, right? Like I could keep them up on the top shelf and not really deal with them. But like now, everything that I used to kind of cope, to use that language, everything I used to cope with those things has kind of been stripped away from me. Right.
Yeah.
And so, Dina, what do you think some of the biggest struggles are with people? And it may not even be, isolation and depression, but are there just kind of these low level anxieties that start bubbling up for people, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think what I see oftentimes with, well, what this is caused, right, is fear and anxiety in our bodies. And a lot of us cope with that in different ways. Like you said, Todd, some of the ways that you've coped with it aren't available to you right now. So I think what I often see in myself and in others, either that anxious, fearful feeling in my body, I will either want to avoid it or outwork it. And instead of listen to it. What's my body trying to tell me, right? This is how God gave me to, this vessel is how he gave me to experience him and others and nature and all the other things that I love. But oftentimes I want to shut down that feeling. I just want to make it go away. I think what Curt was saying is, we aren't built, God didn't make us to live in isolation. Right. Because he said that in Genesis, it's not good for man to be alone. Right. And he didn't create us to not pay attention to our bodies. He gave us all these brains and these bodies to connect together. And he gave us a whole system, right? That limbic system. We're not supposed to avoid fear or anxiety. He gave us a way to work with it, that fight or flight. Right. He just didn't mean for us to be in fight or flight all the time.
Right. That's really interesting to me, because it's like there are these, not to kind of reiterate what I just said, I feel like this might be just restating it in a different way, but there's this whole spectrum of emotion that I'm not accustomed to dealing with, that all of a sudden now it's like, oh, those are the only emotions I'm dealing with, right? Like these feelings of loneliness, these feelings of depression, these feelings of hopelessness, these feelings of fear, these things that while I'm going, while I'm redlining with my activity level, I don't have to worry about those things because I'm always focused, Curt, like you said, I'm always focused on the next thing. And like now, like the next thing is, I feel like I'm in military training, because all I'm wanting to do is like make it to the next meal, or, make it to the next sunrise. Like that's all I'm trying to do right now. So what are some practices, Dina? I think the whole embodied thing is really interesting. Are there any practices that you both would share that if we weren't doing before, we ought to take up now to kind of help deal with some of these emotions?
Well, even just what I was saying, like, I have to get curious about what my body's telling me, right? I absolutely hate public speaking. That was something in graduate school that's like, hey, here's a presentation. Here's another presentation. Get up in front of your class and have another presentation, right? And I kept trying to tell my body, stop feeling this way. Stop feeling this way. Stop being nervous. It didn't really help me to get better. I kept trying to tell my body not to feel what it was feeling.
Absolutely agree. And also, as somebody with a history of anxiety and big struggles there in the past, some of what you were saying, Dina, is something that I say a lot of too, is I spent a long time thinking that, things like that, do not be afraid, meant basically pretend that you aren't scared, pretend that you're not anxious. I think the one thing that I wish I had known earlier on would have been that it's okay to be scared, it's okay to be afraid. And instead of trying to push that away, instead of trying to pretend that, wasn't experiencing that, and trying to pretend that I was experiencing some sort of peace, to be able to first kind of acknowledge where I was at and accept the feelings that were coming up for me. And then to kind of go from there, and not to beat myself up for it, not to further shame myself for it, because that never helped. But to then be gentle with myself on, oh, wow, you're really struggling here. Oh, wow, there's a lot of fear here. There's a lot of stress and anxiety, and just being gentle with myself, and saying, what, kind of processing through how it makes sense that we're scared. And like right now, of course, it makes sense that we're all scared. And then trying to think about how, nowadays it's how, if my kids were scared, what would I do to soothe them, and trying to respond to myself in that same way. I know that I, by default, kind of have a lot more grace for other people than I do for myself, but trying to practice some of that compassion and gentleness towards myself. And for me personally, what's really, really helped with that is some mindfulness meditation practices. And the most basic form of that is kind of what Dina's talking about, just kind of a body scan, tuning into the breath, and kind of doing that. But the good news is that there's so many great resources out there, so many different apps that can walk you through, some really basic mindfulness meditation or some yoga. And we've got some really great research on how that starts to change your brain over time in exactly these ways that we want to at the moment. And that's been something that's been hugely helpful and important for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I've been reading, so it's about 70 years old now, but Viktor Frankl wrote a book. Y'all might be aware of this, A Man's Search for Meaning. I'm not sure if y'all read that or not, but I think it's pretty foundational for like psychologist studies and psychological studies, that sort of stuff. But he talks about his time in Auschwitz and in concentration camps, and he kind of developed some methods that came out of that. But he has this quote in there, and it was he kind of goes through these lessons or these stages that he says that people went through whenever they showed up at some of these work camps. And he kind of dissects those a little bit. And he said the first one is coming to grips with the reality that you're in, right? Like that's the very first thing you have to do. And being okay, Dina, like you said, like recognizing how your body and your mind is responding, and trying not to rationalize that too much. And he had this incredible quote. He said, abnormal reactions to abnormal situations is normal behavior. And I thought that just hit me, pretty powerfully when I read it, because I feel like as the days and weeks go on with the quarantine, that like I'm not thriving the way that I feel like I should be thriving. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But then I also have to remind myself that like this isn't what we're created for. This is a abnormal situation, and my abnormal reaction to it is normal. You know what I mean? Like how else should I be feeling, And so I think that was really helpful for me. And Dina, what you said about just acknowledging that the fear is there, I think is really helpful. And Curt, what you're saying about kind of the mindfulness and just being aware of what's there, and not shaming yourself because of how you're feeling, but just saying, oh, that's a feeling I haven't experienced in a while, because this is a reality I haven't experienced in a while, right? Like this is a circumstance I haven't experienced in a while. And so that was really helpful for me. You both have children and families, and of course, Dina, yours are all grown up almost, and Curt, you have little ones like I do. Are there any advice or some suggestions or resources that you would give to parents who are not only trying to cope with this on a personal level, but also kind of on a family level?
I'd heard someone in the past speak to kind of the pressures of modern parenting, and how much that expectation we put on children's being involved in all these different things, so that you're trying to put out a well-rounded individual, as opposed to, again, coming at it from a place of grace. There's been a push in some circles toward good enough parenting, which I think is something that we might need to, I've heard people speak to lowering the standards a little bit, and maybe in that process, though, hopefully setting ourselves up for more realistic expectations, especially during this time, right? To have some extra flexibility. But I think that sometimes what I started to say was we get the priorities out of line to where we may even put our kids' wants over our own needs, whereas maybe maybe the proper, and this again, I didn't make this up, but maybe the proper order is to have, kids' needs first, then the parents' needs, but then maybe the parents' wants come next, and then the kids' wants. As far as self-care is concerned, that, it's that whole idea of put the oxygen mask on yourself before you assist the person next to you. That I know I hear people, and I've certainly experienced this myself time and time again, feel guilty if they're kind of taking that space, and obviously that space is hard to find right now. But they're afraid that they're neglecting that relationship or something if they step away for a moment, to kind of breathe for a second, or to kind of take a time out for themselves. But I think that very consistently we find that if we get that breathing room once in a while, and we're making sure to tend to our own hearts, that it makes us better parents for that time that we are together, and so I think that kind of working with our partners, if in the moment we need that space to kind of step away, that we have a code word or a look we can give to step to the bedroom or something. As a parent of a 2 and a 5-year-old at the moment, we've had to call some of those on both sides, and then also maybe to have that kind of worked into these flexible routines that we're trying to come up with at the moment. My wife and I practice nights out in normal life, that once a week we each go do something on our own. Those can't be the same kinds of nights out as they can at the moment, but maybe the other parent that night puts the kids to bed while the other does something that kind of recharges their batteries a little bit. So
while the other just stands in the closet and shuts the door.
Exactly, and just practices that breathing.
Goes and sits in the attic for 2 hours.
Sure. I have the over-the-ear headphones that
you go. The silencing headphones. Dina, let me jump in real quick. You're kind of dealing with a little bit of a different side of this, and kind of, your kids are in high school and college. What's been their struggle that you've seen now that school's been taken away and a lot of those activities have been taken, those kind of rites of passage activities have been taken away? How have you tried to lead through that? Because I know there's several people in our church, and maybe even several that are watching this, that have students who, are not going to be able to walk for graduation, or didn't get to go to their prom, or those sorts of things. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that was a piece I had to kind of work with in the very beginning, right? When all the schools were canceled and college kids had to come home and things like that, was, first of all, it was like, okay, this is a new reality. It's okay, because if we're honest, we all probably needed a break from our busy lives, right? So in some ways it was like, like you said, a staycation. But I think something I've talked to you before about, Todd, is like, that's a really big transition.
Right.
And it happened really fast. And I always think that with big transitions, even if there's a good piece to it, there's usually a feeling of loss and of grief. And for even tuning in to my own body, giving people space to have whatever emotions they need to in this time, right? I think sometimes little kids are more in touch with how their bodies and emotions, how they process emotion in their body, right? They're trying to put on their shoes or something, and then they just throw this fit, right? Because they can't make it happen. I almost think I kind of had to let my high school and my college kids kind of have space to have grief, however it looks. And me too, right? Because I don't get to go to a college graduation either.
Right.
And so and I don't get to see my friends either. They don't get to see their friends. Something they've been waiting for their entire lives, like a graduation or prom. They don't get to do that. So I think, and we as a culture and a society sometimes have said, oh, just suck it up, or yeah, but you got this, but giving people space to feel what they feel.
I think something you said also was really interesting, Dina, that you both obviously counsel way more people than I do, but the few people that I've had the privilege of talking to and counseling, it's really interesting to me how grief and in most people's minds, grief and gratitude seem to be on polar opposites of each other. Mm. That if I'm grieving something, I can't be grateful for what I have, right? Or if I'm grateful for something, then I can't. It's like I can't grieve a loss, because if you're grieving a loss, then you're just not grateful, right? Mm. It's kind of, the old backwoods preacher at my grandfather's funeral, that when I was standing at my grandfather's grave and looking over his casket, came up to me and said, "Don't be sad. He's in a better place now." And it's like, well, I can believe that and still be sad at the same time, right? Yeah. So maybe grief and gratitude aren't polar opposites of each other. Maybe they're kind of two sides of the same coin. What I don't think is the reason I bring that up, Dean, is what I don't think is helpful is exactly what you said, is going to some of our students and even their families that are dealing with this stuff and just saying like, well, it could be worse.
Right.
It's like, well, that okay, yeah, obviously it could be worse, right? We could be in a concentration camp. I'm reading Viktor Frankl. It could be worse, trust me. But that doesn't mean that what we have lost doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how culturally sometimes we think that it can kind of fall a lot of different ways, but that to optimize our lives, like that the pursuit of happiness means that we max out our ability to experience happiness and try to avoid the more painful feelings. Where, as I think a lot of times how I think about what Dean and I do is helping people learn to experience the full spectrum of emotion. And like you're saying, that may be that I am simultaneously in joy and suffering at the same time,
right?
Or that I feel that grief, but also that that gratitude, or and that's again, that's more how our brains work. And we talk about how you can't actually selectively numb emotion, that if you're trying to numb the bad, you also do numb the good, and so being able to be honest about all that as it comes up, and as you kind of learn to be present with that, then you get practice at what I can do, to be compassionate with myself with whatever it is that's there.
What are some resources that you would point people to, either professional resources, clinics, helplines?
Oh, I'm infamous for my resource dump, so I'll fire hose it. But Calm was really influential to me. Calm and Headspace are two of the kind of subscription-based meditation services that people really like. And the free one, though, that has an app is Insight Timer. That's what I use now. And I would definitely encourage people to, on those, Insight Timer has thousands of free ones you can check out. And kind of each one has a common. Headspace also have a trial to get you started on some of the basics of that kind of meditation. And I definitely recommend starting with guided. That doesn't mean go spend 20 minutes in silence. That's not, doesn't usually work for starting out. There's also a resource called, the website is beinginhim.net. And that has some Christian meditations on scripture and integrates some of that mindfulness stuff at the same time. They have tracks that you can buy on that one. The one that I use for clients that you can link up to a professional's account is called Sanvello. It's SANVELLO. And it has everything from a mood tracker to, if you're connected with a mental health professional, you can take assessments on there and kind of track anxiety or depression, or that sort of thing over time. And then it has lots of different resources. It has a gratitude journal, like you've mentioned, the gratitude stuff. It has meditations. It has all kinds of things in there that you can kind of use for coping skills that are in the app. Usually you need premium or to be connected to the mental health professional to get all access to all that. But right now they're actually offering it all for free, premium for free.
That's great. Yeah.
So I found a workbook from the Wellness Society that's actually specifically for what we're talking about during this time, that they made available as a free resource that has a lot of good stuff and also has links to a lot of other resources as well. And then I have a self-care kind of worksheet that I just is kind of basic, but can be really helpful too, that I'll pass out sometimes that I'd be happy to link you to, Todd, if that would be helpful.
Yeah. So we'll put a lot of these things. I'll put these up on the screen as people are watching, but we'll also put them in the item description of the video. So if you're interested in any of these, we'll put some helplines down there as well, and if you're experiencing any sort of suicidal thoughts or anything like that, we want to be a resource for you as well, and to be available for you as well. So we'll put some of those too. So
I'll say a quick note about the crisis lines, that Arkansas has their own kind of state crisis center that we can link to. And the kind of disclaimer I always give to people is like, if you're asking the question of, does what I'm considering to call about qualify as a crisis, like just go ahead and call. Like,
sure.
I've even called the crisis center in my office just to kind of give people a sense of what they're about, and so that they're comfortable with talking to them, and they're great people there. And then we also have a nationwide crisis text line that if your anxiety involves talking on the phone or that sort of thing, that you can send text messages to. So that's another, I can give you that number as well.
That's awesome.
Well, and can I just plug our Stevens ministry too?
Absolutely. Yeah. Go for it, Dina.
Because that's where I first kind of got my feet wet when I was thinking about counseling. And they do 50 hours of training. And I think that even if you don't want a Stevens minister for long term, I think probably you or Andrew or Jen would be more than welcome to try to hook people up to someone who would call them, check on them, pray for them, Zoom them.
Yeah.
Because I firmly believe that, a lot of times when we're hurting or we're struggling, we want to go try to figure it out by ourselves. And we're not meant to do that. So, with Stevens ministry, if you're worried about anyone thinking badly of you or judging you or in any way, like, we all struggle, and we all need each other. That's and right. So, like, I got really excited when you wanted to do this, because I'm like, yay, I get to be with people that I like.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that just does something for my whole body, right? Like, right. Yes, I'll do that with you guys, sure. Yeah. That's what Stevens ministry is there for too. And if you just want someone to call you,
right,
someone from our church will call you and talk to you. And
absolutely, yeah. Well, Curt, Dina, thank y'all so much, and thank you, listener and viewer, for tuning in and for hanging with us. Hopefully, this has been helpful, and we pray God's best for you during this time of quarantine. May God bless you and keep you until we meet again.